Have you ever been the one person in your family who just didn't fit? The one they looked at with a mix of pity and disappointment? For years, that was me. They called me the failure, the dreamer, the useless one, and I almost believed them. That is, until the night they tried to humiliate me in front of hundreds of people, and their whole world came crashing down. But before that night, there was another one. A quieter, colder night that planted the seed for everything that came after. It was Christmas. The air in my parents' house was thick with the scent of pine needles from the towering tree in the living room and the rich aroma of my mother's famous roast beef. The crystal wine glasses, reserved for special occasions, gleamed under the light of the chandelier, each one a tiny star. This was the annual Evans family Christmas dinner, an event that was less about festive cheer and more about performance. A performance in which I was consistently cast in the role of the disappointment. I clutched the gift in my hands, the edges of the simple brown paper crinkling under the pressure of my nervous fingers. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was a stupid thing to be nervous about, just a gift, but in my family, gifts were statements. They were declarations of success, of status. My gift was a photo album. I had spent weeks on it, digging through dusty boxes in the attic, carefully restoring old, forgotten photos of my parents when they were young, of their wedding, of our first family vacations. I'd written little captions for each one, memories I held dear. To me, it was a priceless treasure of our shared history. To them, I feared it would be worthless. I took a deep breath and stepped into the dining room. The conversation stopped for a half-second, as all eyes turned to me. My father, Mark, sat at the head of the table, looking regal and stern. My mother, Susan, was beside him, her smile perfectly polished, and across from them, my sister, Jessica, sat like a queen on her throne, radiating an aura of smug satisfaction. "Chloe, you're late," my mother said, her voice a little too bright. It was her polite way of saying I'd already started the evening with a mistake. "Sorry, traffic was bad," I mumbled, taking my seat. "Or maybe her old car just couldn't keep up," Jessica chimed in, a smirk playing on her lips. Her husband, Ben, who sat beside her, gave a weak and comfortable cough and busied himself with his napkin. He never looked me in the eye during these gatherings. Now, let's not start," my father said, though there was no real conviction in his voice. He was already looking at Jessica with undisguised pride. "Jessica, your mother was just telling us about your promotion. Senior partner. That's incredible." "Well, it was a lot of hard work," Jessica said, preening under the praise. "But it pays off, which brings me to my gift." With a flourish, she produced two sleek, expensive-looking envelopes from her purse and handed them to our parents. "First-class tickets to Europe," she announced to the room. "A 2-week tour of Italy and France. You've always wanted to go." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Jessica, we can't possibly accept this." But her eyes were shining. My father was speechless for a moment, just staring at the tickets. He looked up at Jessica, his face glowing. This is beyond generous, honey. Thank you." The room was filled with murmurs of approval from my aunt and uncle. My parents were glowing, basking in the glory of their successful daughter. The golden child. Then, my mother's eyes landed on me, and the light in them dimmed slightly. "Well, Chloe, do you have something for us?" The heavy, handmade album suddenly felt like a ton of bricks in my lap. My cheeks burned as I stood up and walked over to them. "It's not as fancy as Jessica's," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "But I thought—" I handed it to them. My father took it, his expression unreadable. He unwrapped it slowly. When he saw the simple, leather-bound album, his face fell. A deep, weary sigh escaped his lips. My mother peered over his shoulder, her polite smile tightening. Silence. The loud, cheerful atmosphere had been sucked out of the room. Then, a single sharp sound cut through the quiet. A laugh. It was Jessica. She threw her head back and let out a peal of condescending laughter. "Oh, that's so cute, Chloe," she said, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "It's like something a child would make in art class." The dam of my composure cracked. I could feel the hot sting of tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. My father closed the album without looking past the first page. He placed it on the floor beside his chair, as if it were a piece of trash. "Chloe," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We appreciate the thought. We really do. But this is a serious family dinner. It's a time for celebrating real accomplishments." My mother delivered the final, fatal blow. She looked at me, her eyes cold. "Your sister worked so hard to elevate this family's name, to give us things to be proud of. The least you could do is not embarrass us with your little hobbies." Hobbies. That's what my heart was to them. My effort. My love. A hobby. I was mocked. Made to feel like a failure. A complete and utter nobody. The room began to spin. The faces around the table blurred into a gallery of judgment. I saw Ben, my brother-in-law, staring down at his plate, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. He knew this was wrong, but his silence was his vote. He sided with the bullies. "Excuse me," I managed to choke out. "I don't feel well." I turned and walked away, my back straight, my head held high. I didn't run. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. As I walked down the hall, I heard Jessica's voice, followed by another round of laughter. It was the soundtrack to my exit, the music of my humiliation. The photo album, my gift of shame, was left forgotten on the floor, a testament to a love that was offered but not received. And in that moment, something inside me broke. But as I would later learn, some things have to break before they can be rebuilt into something stronger. The weeks following that Christmas were a blur of gray. I went to my low-paying admin job at the community center. I came home to my small, lonely apartment, and I tried to ignore the hollow ache in my chest. I screened my family's calls. What was there to say? My mother would call to talk about Jessica. My father would call to ask if I'd found a real job yet. And Jessica would call just to remind me of my place in the universe. So I let the phone ring, letting the silence of my apartment be my only companion. I was at my lowest point, a ghost in my own life, haunted by the labels they had branded me with: failure, loser, useless. I started to believe them. One Tuesday afternoon, after a particularly draining day of filing paperwork and answering phones, I came home to find a thick cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. It felt heavy and official. The return address was a law firm downtown. My first thought was that I was being sued for something, or maybe it was a bill I'd forgotten to pay. My stomach twisted into a knot. I slid it open with a trembling finger. Inside, a formal letter requested my presence for a private reading concerning the last will and testament of Rose Evans, my grandmother. Grandma Rose had passed away almost a year ago. She was the one person in my family who had never looked at me with disappointment. She'd loved my dreamer heart, as she called it. She'd encouraged my painting, my writing, my volunteering, all the things my parents dismissed as hobbies. The main will reading had happened months ago. My parents and Jessica had gone. They came back saying Grandma had left her small house to a local bird sanctuary and divided her modest savings between them. They dismissed it as a tiny inheritance, barely worth the trip to the lawyer's office. So why was this letter addressed only to me? A week later, I found myself sitting in a plush leather chair in a quiet, wood-paneled office. The lawyer, a kind-faced man named Mr. Abernathy, smiled gently at me. "Ms. Evans, thank you for coming," he said. "Your grandmother was a very specific woman. She had her primary will, which was read to your family, and then she had this, a codicil, a separate trust to be opened and read only to you, 1 year after her passing." My heart started to beat a little faster. Mr. Abernathy slid a sealed envelope across the polished mahogany desk, My name was written on the front in my grandmother's familiar, elegant script. "She left this for you as well," he said. My hands shook as I opened the letter. Inside was a single folded piece of stationery and a cashier's check. I unfolded the paper first. "My dearest Chloe," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means a year has passed, and I hope you are finding your way. I know how they are. I know they can make you feel small. But you, my girl, are anything but. They measure wealth in dollars and promotions. You measure it in kindness and light. Don't ever let them change that. Your heart is your greatest asset, more valuable than any stock or piece of property. I didn't have much, but I saved what I could. I've left it for you. It's not enough to buy a fancy car or a big house, and I know you wouldn't want that anyway. It's seed money for one of your beautiful dreams. Use it to build something that matters, something that they can never tear down. Show them that the things they mock are the things that can actually change the world. I love you. I believe in you. All my love." Grandma rose. Tears. I hadn't allowed myself to cry at Christmas, now streamed freely down my face, dripping onto the precious letter. They were tears of grief, but also of gratitude, of being seen. Finally, truly seen. Then I looked at the check, my breath caught in my throat. I read the number once, twice, 3 times, certain I was mistaken. $75,000. To my sister, it would be a rounding error. To my parents, a down payment on a luxury car. But to me, sitting there in that quiet office with my grandmother's words echoing in my soul, it was everything. It was a lifeline. It was a second chance. But it wasn't just money. As I stared at the check, my grief began to crystallize into something hard and sharp. Resolve. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a weapon. It was a tool. My grandmother hadn't just given me money. She had given me a mission. Sitting there, I made a silent vow. I would take this gift, this seed of faith, and I would build something so significant, so impactful, that it would dwarf every condescending word my family had ever thrown at me. I would do it quietly, secretly. I would remain a ghost to them. They would continue to see me as the poor, useless failure, and one day, without them even knowing how it happened, the world I built in the shadows would step into the light and eclipse their shallow, glittering world completely. The $75,000 sat in a newly opened bank account, a silent, powerful promise. For the next 2 months, I became a creature of the night. After my mind-numbing day job at the community center, where I was just Chloe, the quiet admin, I would go home and transform. My tiny apartment became a war room. The walls were covered in sticky notes, flowcharts, and printouts. I didn't want to just give the money away. Grandma Rose had told me to build something. I couldn't just invest it in stocks. My family's obsession with the market had soured me on that world. I wanted to build an engine for good. My research led me down a rabbit hole of non-profit bureaucracy. I saw how much money was wasted on administrative bloat, on galas and fundraisers that cost nearly as much as they raised. I saw a system that was often inefficient and slow to help those who needed it most. That's when the idea hit me. I wouldn't start a charity. I would start a foundation. A new kind of foundation. Its mission would be brutally simple: to provide direct, no red tape funding to small, on-the-ground children's charities that were doing amazing work, but were on the brink of collapse. My foundation would be the cavalry. My first target was a place I knew well, the Haven for Hope Children's Shelter. I had volunteered there in college, a cheerful, chaotic place that felt more like a home than an institution. But I'd heard rumors that it was struggling badly. A quick search confirmed my fears. They had lost a major grant and were set to close their winter program, which provided warm beds and hot meals for kids during the coldest months of the year. I spent a week drafting a proposal. I didn't just want to write a check. I wanted to offer a partnership. I created a new entity, the Sparrow's Nest Foundation, a name that felt humble and protective. Then I scheduled a meeting with the shelter's director, a man named David Harrison. I arrived at Haven for Hope on a gray Tuesday morning. The building looked even more tired than I remembered. There was a crack in the front window, and the paint was peeling from the sign. I felt a pang of sadness, followed by a surge of determination. Mr. Harrison's office was small and cluttered, piled high with binders and files. He was a man in his 60s with kind, weary eyes and a face etched with the lines of someone who fought too many battles and lost too many nights of sleep. He greeted me with a polite but skeptical handshake. I could tell he was expecting another well-meaning but ultimately useless conversation with someone offering to help by donating a bag of old clothes. "Miss Evans," he said, gesturing to a worn-out chair. "Thank you for coming. What can I do for you?" I didn't waste any time. I opened my briefcase, a cheap one I'd bought at a thrift store, and pulled out a professionally bound proposal. I placed it on his desk. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I represent a new private foundation called the Sparrow's Nest. Our mission is to provide immediate, high-impact funding to organizations exactly like yours." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. He opened the binder. Inside wasn't just a vague offer of help, but a full-blown business plan. I had analyzed his shelter's public financial statements. I had identified their funding gap. I had outlined a 3-month strategy to stabilize their finances, along with a proposal for a long-term partnership to help them secure more diverse and stable funding streams. He flipped through the pages, his skepticism slowly melting away, replaced by a look of astonishment. He kept pausing, rereading sections, his eyes widening slightly. "This is incredibly detailed," he murmured, looking up at me. "You've done more research than most of our board members." "I believe in being prepared," I said simply, "and I believe in what you do here, which is why my foundation would like to make an initial, unrestricted donation of $20,000 effective immediately to ensure your winter program remains open." Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his jaw practically on the floor. He stared at me, really looked at me, for the first time. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a spark of hope. $20,000? Just like that? Just like that, I confirmed. No long grant applications. No strings attached. Just a belief that you know best how to use it. He was silent for a long moment, studying my face. He seemed to see past the cheap blazer and the nervous energy. He saw the fire. He saw the resolve I had been nursing for months. "You're very young to be running a foundation," he said, his voice soft. "I have a very motivated benefactor," I replied, thinking of Grandma Rose. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his tired face. "Miss Evans, you're not just a donor, are you?" he asked. "You're a founder." The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. A founder, not a failure, not a loser, not a hobbyist. A founder. It was the first brick in the new identity I was building for myself. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice filled with a confidence I hadn't known I possessed. "I am." "Well," Mr. Harrison said, closing the binder and extending his hand across the desk. "In that case, Chloe, may I call you Chloe? I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership." As I shook his hand, I knew he wasn't just an ally. He was my first real believer since my grandmother. He would be my mentor, my confidant, the public face of the secret war I was about to wage. This was the start. The $20,000 donation to Haven for Hope was just the beginning. The remaining $55,000 of my grandmother's inheritance was the seed, but for the Sparrow's Nest Foundation to grow into the powerful engine I envisioned, it needed more fuel. It needed constant, dedicated work, and that work had a cost. A deeply personal one. My life split into two. By day, I was Chloe Evans, the invisible admin assistant at the community center, earning just enough to scrape by. I filed, I answered phones, I smiled politely. No one there had any idea what I did when I clocked out. But the moment I walked through the door of my apartment, I became the founder and sole employee of a multifaceted philanthropic enterprise. The contrast was jarring. My days were gray and beige. My nights were a vibrant, chaotic explosion of purpose. To pour every spare cent I had into the foundation's operating account, I entered a period of extreme visceral struggle. The first thing to go was my car. I sold the beat-up sedan for a few $1,000s, all of which went directly into the foundation. I started taking the bus, which added 2 hours of travel time to my day. I used that time on the bus to read grant writing manuals on my phone until my eyes burned. Next, I gave up my small one-bedroom apartment. I found a tiny studio in a less desirable part of town. It was little more than a box with a mattress on the floor, a hot plate, and a mini fridge. The paint was peeling, and the faucet in the kitchenette dripped with a maddening, rhythmic persistence. The place was always cold. I'd sit on my bed, wrapped in a blanket, my laptop warming my legs as I worked. This tiny, grim room was the secret headquarters of my grand plan. My diet consisted almost exclusively of ramen noodles, oatmeal, and cheap coffee. I became an expert at making a single packet of noodles feel like a meal. Sometimes, when I was working late and the hunger pains became too distracting, I'd allow myself the luxury of an egg dropped into the boiling water. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes, permanent bruises from exhaustion. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My new normal was working until 3 a.m., hunched over my glowing laptop screen, building financial models, researching other struggling charities, and writing meticulous grant proposals to larger foundations, using the initial success at Haven for Hope as my proof of concept. Then I'd catch a few hours of fitful sleep before waking up to the jarring sound of my alarm to go to my day job and do it all over again. The loneliness was a physical presence in the room. It was a heavy blanket that smothered me in the quiet hours of the night. There was no one to talk to about the small victories, like when a grant application was accepted, or the crushing defeats, like a rejection letter that felt like a personal failure. This was my secret war, and I was its only soldier. The sharpest moments of contrast came from my family. They were living in a different universe, one of glitter and ease, and they seemed to delight in reminding me of it. One evening, as I was measuring out my portion of dry oatmeal for dinner, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the ignore button, but I knew that would only lead to a dozen more calls. I answered. "Chloe, hi honey," she chirped, her voice obnoxiously cheerful. "I have the most wonderful news. Jessica and Ben just bought a new car. It's one of those huge luxury SUVs, the kind with the heated seats and the giant screen. It's just gorgeous. We went for a ride in it today." I stared at the peeling paint on my wall, the sound of the dripping faucet a slow, steady drumbeat in the background. I said, my voice flat. "That's great, Mom. It's just wonderful to see what hard work can get you," she continued, and I knew the words were aimed directly at me. It was a missile launched from her world of comfort into my world of struggle. Jess works so hard at that firm. She deserves. "You know, Chloe? It's not too late for you to think about a real career. That little job of yours is fine for now, but you're not getting any younger." I felt a hot flash of anger, so intense it made me dizzy. She had no idea. She had no idea that while she was riding in a new SUV, I was fighting to keep a shelter full of children warm. She had no idea that my little job was a cover for a life of intense purpose and sacrifice. She just saw the surface, the cheap clothes, the lack of a car, the tiny apartment. She saw a failure. I took a deep breath, pushing the anger down. It was fuel. I would not waste it on a pointless argument. "I'm happy for them, Mom. I have to go, my dinner's getting cold." "All right, dear. We'll talk soon." I hung up the phone and looked at my bowl of plain, watery oatmeal. The pain of her words, of their complete and utter blindness, didn't break me. It did the opposite. It forged my resolve into something harder than steel. Every condescending word, every boastful announcement, was another log on the fire that kept me going. Through the long, cold ramen noodle nights, they thought they were reminding me of my failure. In reality, they were building my victory. The Sparrow's Nest Foundation was growing, slowly but surely. After months of relentless work, a few of my grant proposals had paid off. Small trickles of funding were coming in from larger established foundations, who were intrigued by my lean, high-impact model. With this new capital, I was able to extend our support to a second organization, a small after-school arts program for at-risk teens. My life was still a grueling cycle of work, eat, and work some more. But for the first time, I could see a glimmer of a self-sustaining future for my secret project. One of my new strategies was to build partnerships with small, local businesses. I arranged a meeting at a trendy downtown coffee shop with the owner of a successful graphic design company. I was hoping she would agree to do some pro bono branding work for one of the charities we were supporting. I wore my one good blazer, the one I saved for important meetings, and tried to project an aura of confidence I didn't quite feel. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. The owner, a woman named Maria, was impressed by the foundation's mission and the data I presented. She loved the idea and agreed to help. We shook hands, and I was buzzing with the victory. It was a small step, but it felt huge. I was glowing as I packed up my cheap briefcase. "Chloe, is that you?" The voice was like ice water down my back. I froze, my hand still on the latch of my briefcase. I looked up and saw my sister, Jessica, standing a few feet away, a perfectly crafted smirk on her face. Beside her stood her husband, Ben, looking, as always, deeply uncomfortable. "Jessica," I said, my voice even. "What a surprise." "I'll say," she said, her eyes sweeping over my worn blazer, and then around the coffee shop. "Slumming it. Are we? I didn't know you came to this side of town." She gestured vaguely with a hand adorned with a massive diamond ring. "Still working that little job at the community center?" she asked, her voice just a little too loud, clearly for the benefit of anyone nearby who might be listening. I saw Ben shift his weight from one foot to the other. He looked at the floor, at the ceiling, at the barista behind the counter, anywhere but at me. His complicity was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating silence that hung in the air between us. "Hey Chloe," he mumbled, his voice so quiet it was barely audible. It was his standard greeting in these situations, a token acknowledgement before he faded into the background and let Jessica take the stage. "I'm meeting with a business partner," I said calmly, refusing to be rattled. Maria had already left, so it was just the three of us. Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. "A business partner? For what? Your knitting club?" She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Honestly, Chloe, Mom and Dad are so worried. They talk about it all the time. They just want you to do something with your life, to have some ambition. They just want you to stop being such a—" She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes littering with malice. "A loser." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. I saw Ben flinch, his head jerked up for a second and his eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something in them, shame, maybe even pity. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He looked away again, his jaw tight, his silence a resounding endorsement of his wife's cruelty. He was the enabler, the one who held the door open for the abuser. His weakness was just as damaging as her strength. In the past, a comment like that would have shattered me. It would have replayed in my head for weeks, each syllable a fresh cut. But something had changed: the sleepless nights, the ramen noodle dinners, the quiet victories I was stacking up in secret. They had built a kind of armor around my heart. I looked my sister directly in the eye, my expression unreadable. I didn't get defensive. I didn't lash out. I simply gave her nothing. "I'm doing just fine, Jessica," I said, my voice steady and cool. I snapped my briefcase shut, stood up and walked past them without another word. I didn't look back to see the expression on her face, but I could feel her surprise. She had expected me to crumble. She had wanted a reaction, tears, anything to confirm her power over me. I gave her nothing. Walking out of that coffee shop, the small victory with Maria felt 10 times sweeter. Jessica's insults were just noise now. They were the meaningless words of someone who lived in a gilded cage, completely surreal of the real world being built just outside her window. And I was the one building it. Summer arrived, and with it, the dreaded annual Evans family reunion barbecue. It was a mandatory attendance event, a sprawling affair at my aunt and uncle's suburban home. The thought of spending an entire Saturday fending off passive-aggressive questions about my career and watching Jessica be paraded around like a prize racehorse filled me with a familiar sense of dread. But I had to go. Not showing up would create a different kind of drama, a storm of concerned phone calls and accusations that I was drifting away. It was easier to just show up, be invisible for a few hours, and leave. I arrived armed with my usual strategy: keep to myself, find a quiet corner of the backyard, and nurse a cup of lemonade until I could politely make my escape. The yard was buzzing with relatives I saw once a year. My parents immediately latched onto me, their faces etched with concern. "Chloe, you look thin," my mother said, her eyes scanning my simple sundress. "Are you eating properly?" It was a loaded question, another way of asking if I could afford food. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. Just then, my cousin Sarah bounced over, dragging a handsome, well-dressed man by the hand. "Everyone, this is my fiancé, Liam," she announced proudly. This was Liam Shaw, the man Sarah had been gushing about for months. I knew from the family grapevine that he was some kind of big-shot venture capitalist. He had a calm, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He shook my parents' hands, exuding an easy confidence. After the initial introductions, my parents were called away, and I found myself standing awkwardly with Sarah and Liam. Sarah was quickly pulled into a conversation with another cousin, leaving me alone with him. I prepared for the usual polite but dismissive small talk. "So Chloe," he began, his voice friendly, "Sarah tells me you're the creative one in the family." I braced myself for the inevitable follow-up, the condescending question about my art, but it never came. Instead, he asked, "What kind of work do you do?" This was the question I always fumbled. "I work at a community center," was my usual, self-deprecating reply. But looking at Liam's genuinely curious face, something shifted in me. The months of hard work, the secret successes, they had given me a new vocabulary. "I work in administration," I said, "but my real passion is in nonprofit logistics and fundraising strategy." The words felt foreign and powerful on my tongue. Liam's eyebrows shot up in genuine interest. He wasn't a part of my family's insulated world of law and medicine. He was a venture capitalist. He understood strategy, logistics, and scalability. He saw the world in systems. "Oh, really?" he said, leaning against the porch railing. "That's fascinating. Most people think nonprofits just run on good intentions. They don't realize it's a brutal market for funding. What's your angle?" I was so used to being dismissed that his sharp, insightful question caught me off guard. For the first time, I was talking to someone from my family's orbit, who wasn't judging me based on my salary. He was interested in the work. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, I started talking. I didn't reveal my foundation, of course, but I spoke about my theories. I talked about the inefficiencies in traditional grant-making, the need for agile, high-impact funding, and the importance of data-driven philanthropy to prove efficacy to a new generation of donors. I used the language of my secret world. Liam listened intently, nodding, his eyes never leaving my face. He wasn't just being polite, he was engaged. "So you're essentially applying a venture capital model to philanthropy," he said, a look of dawning realization on his face. "Small seed investments in high potential, undervalued assets, in this case, charities, and providing strategic support to help them scale." That's a fascinating scalability problem. My heart leaped. He got it. He instantly, completely got it. He saw the complex machine I was building, not just the nice hobby my parents saw. Solving that scalability issue, he continued, a look of deep thought on his face. That would be a complete game changer for the entire sector. You could disrupt the entire philanthropic landscape. Disrupt, game changer. These were words from his world, from Jessica's world. But he was applying them to my work. This one conversation, this small moment of validation from a neutral, intelligent Hazuker, felt more significant than 1,000 compliments from someone who was paid to be nice. It was real. Our conversation was interrupted by my father, who clapped Liam on the back. Liam, don't let my Chloe bore you with her idealistic nonsense. Come on. I want to introduce you to Jessica's managing partner. Liam smiled politely at my father, but as he was led away, he glanced back at me. He gave me a small, respectful nod. It was a gesture that said, I see you. What you're doing is important. I stayed in my corner for the rest of the afternoon, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked cousin. I was a disruptor, a game changer. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for my family. They were so busy looking for glitter and gold that they couldn't see the diamond mine I was building right under their noses. The Sparrow's Nest Foundation was no longer just an idea or a struggle. It was becoming a real force. Under the public-facing leadership of the now re-energized Mr. Harrison, Haven for Hope had become a model of success. Our initial investment, combined with the strategic support I provided from the shadows, had allowed them to secure 2 major corporate partnerships. The arts program we funded was getting local news coverage. My secret world was solidifying, becoming more real with each passing day. I was still living my double life, still subsisting on cheap food and little sleep, but the exhaustion was now mixed with a thrilling sense of momentum. I had established a small, anonymous advisory board online, a group of retired financial analysts and nonprofit veterans who were guiding me. I was learning, growing, and becoming the founder my grandmother had believed I could be. My foundation was my entire world, a secret garden I tended with fierce devotion. One rainy Thursday night, I was in my tiny studio apartment, which felt more like a command center than a home. I was eating my dinner, a bowl of plain white rice with some soy sauce, while staring at a complex spreadsheet on my laptop. I was trying to figure out how to stretch our modest budget to help a third organization, a literacy program for immigrant children. The numbers weren't working. A wave of despair washed over me. For all my progress, I was still so small. My resources were so limited compared to the ocean of need. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unsaved number, but the area code was local. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Chloe? It's David Harrison. His voice was different. Usually, Mr. Harrison's tone was calm and steady, even when delivering good news. Tonight, it was trembling with an energy I had never heard before. It sounded like pure, unadulterated excitement. David, is everything okay? I asked, my heart starting to pound. Okay? Chloe, it's more than okay. It's miraculous, he exclaimed. I could hear him pacing in his office. You're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone. Do you know Alan Sterling? I almost dropped my fork. Alan Sterling wasn't just some local businessman, he was a legend. He was the reclusive tech CEO of a multi-billion-dollar software company, a man famous for his shrewd investments and his absolute refusal to engage in traditional, flashy philanthropy. The Alan Sterling, I whispered. The one and only, David confirmed, his voice cracking with emotion. He somehow heard about us, about our model. He said he was tired of writing checks to black holes. He was impressed by our efficiency, our direct impact, our low overhead. He called it the most intelligent philanthropic model he's ever seen. My bowl of rice was completely forgotten. I was standing now, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. Chloe, David said, his voice dropping to an awed whisper. He's making a donation, a personal donation from his own fortune. He's wiring the money tomorrow. How much, David? I asked, my own voice trembling. Is it enough to help the literacy program? I heard David take a deep, shaky breath on the other end of the line. Chloe, he's donating $5 million. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds. $5 million. I sank onto my mattress, the floor feeling like it had dropped out from under me. He said it's enough to secure our future forever, David continued, his voice thick with tears. And to break ground on the new state-of-the-art wing we've only ever dreamed of. Chloe, we did it. You did it. You haven't just saved a shelter. You've built an empire of hope. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then, with a shaking hand, I opened my foundation's secure banking portal on my laptop. The next morning, I logged in again, and there it was. The number. A 5, followed by 6 zeros. It stared back at me from the screen. A dizzying, impossible reality. In that moment, everything shifted. The power I had been chasing, the impact I had been dreaming of. It was no longer an abstract concept. It was real. It was tangible. It was sitting in a bank account that I controlled. I looked around my tiny, cold apartment. I thought of the ramen noodles, the sleepless nights, the constant, gnawing anxiety. I thought of my sister's mocking laughter, and my father's disappointed sighs. They had called me useless. They had called me a nobody. But a nobody didn't just receive a $5 million donation. A failure didn't just build an empire of hope. The girl who was humiliated at Christmas was gone. In her place sat a woman who had just been handed the power to change thousands of lives. And with that power came a new, terrifying, and exhilarating question. What was I going to do with it? The $5 million donation changed everything. The Sparrow's Nest Foundation went from a small, scrappy operation to a serious player overnight. The news of Alan Sterling's investment and his praise for our unique model sent ripples through the local philanthropic community. Suddenly, the quiet work Mr. Harrison and I were doing was under a microscope. Other charities started reaching out, asking for advice. Potential corporate sponsors started calling him. The Empire of Hope was no longer a secret. With the funding for the new wing at Haven for Hope secured, plans moved forward at lightning speed. Architects were hired, designs were approved, and a date was set for a massive charity gala to celebrate the groundbreaking. It was meant to be a night of triumph, a public declaration of the shelter's incredible turnaround. For me, it was a looming storm cloud. My anonymity had been my greatest strength. It was the shield that protected me from my family's judgment and allowed me to work without distraction. I was the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand guiding everything from the shadows, and I liked it that way. A few weeks before the gala, I had my regular strategy call with David Harrison. He was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement, telling me about the guest list, the media outlets that had confirmed their attendance, and the incredible buzz around the event. It's going to be the biggest night in the shelter's history, he said, his voice filled with pride. A testament to everything we've built. It's a testament to your hard work, David, I corrected him, as I always did. Don't be so modest, Chloe, he chuckled. We both know who the real architect of all this is. Which brings me to something important. The board and I have been talking. We want to do something to honor the person who started it all. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. David, you know how I feel about that. The foundation is anonymous. The founder is anonymous. That's the whole point. I know, he said gently. But this is different. This isn't just a donation, Chloe. This is a legacy. We aren't just building a new wing. We are building a monument to a new way of thinking. And that monument deserves a name. He paused, and I could hear him take a breath. We want to name the new building after you, Chloe. The board voted unanimously. We want to dedicate the Chloe Evans wing for children. The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. My name, in big, bold letters on the side of a building, for everyone to see, for my family to see. A wave of pure panic washed over me. All I could picture were their faces, the confusion, the anger, the accusations, my secret life, my quiet power would be blown wide open. I can't, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. David, I can't. Please, you can't ask me to do that. Part of me, the part that had been hurt and humiliated for years, wanted to stay hidden forever. It was safer in the shadows. To step into the light meant facing them, and I wasn't strong enough. What if they still found a way to mock me? What if they tried to take credit for it? Was the satisfaction of a single night of revenge worth the lifetime of chaos that would follow? David was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, but firm. Chloe, think about what this means. It's not just about you. It's about the story. It's about showing the world that one person, a person with no fame or family fortune, just a good heart and a brilliant idea, can make a monumental difference. Your story will inspire others. Hiding it would be a disservice to the very people we're trying to help. He was right. And as he spoke, another voice echoed in my mind. The voice of my grandmother, from her letter. Show them that the things they mock are the things that can actually change the world. And then I thought of the children at the shelter. The ones who felt small and overlooked, just like I had. My story wasn't just my story. It was theirs too. I closed my eyes and thought back to that Christmas dinner. I saw the condescending smirk on Jessica's face. I heard my father's sigh of disappointment. I felt the crushing weight of my mother's words, "Don't embarrass us." This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. It was about taking the name they had tried so hard to tarnish and turning it into a symbol of hope. It was my final test. To be a name, or to remain a ghost. I took a deep, shuddering breath and made my decision. Okay, David, I said, my voice quiet but steady. The panic had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Okay, we'll do it. Chloe, that's wonderful. But, I interrupted, we do it on one condition. My name, my identity as the founder. You don't reveal it until the very end of the night. Let them have their party. Let everyone give their speeches. I want the reveal to be the last thing that happens. David was quiet for a second. Then I heard the smile in his voice. I understand completely. Theatrics. I love it. It's your night, Chloe. We'll do it exactly your way. The invitation arrived a week later. It was thick and heavy, made of creamy cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. It felt like a wedding invitation, but it was for a party that signified a different kind of union. The marriage of my secret life and my public one. The Haven for Hope Gala, celebrating a new beginning. I stared at the invitation, a bitter, ironic smile playing on my lips. At the very top, under the event title, was a list of the main sponsors, and there, in bold, elegant font, was the name of the primary corporate sponsor, Lockhart, Steele and Evans. Jessica's law firm. Of course, it was perfect. In their endless quest for good PR and community accolades, her firm had latched onto the city's most celebrated new philanthropic cause. They wanted to attach their name to the success story of the year. They had no idea they were trying to take credit for the work of the very person they had spent a lifetime devaluing. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. They were sponsoring a gala to celebrate me. I pinned the invitation to the corkboard above my small desk, right next to a printout of the architectural rendering for the new wing. The two documents stared back at me, the gilded cage of my family's world, and the concrete symbol of my freedom from it. A few days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was giddy, bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard since Jessica made law review. "Chloe, did you get the invitation?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. Isn't it thrilling? Jessica's firm is the main sponsor for the Haven for Hope Gala. It's such a prestigious event. Everyone who is anyone in the city will be there. It's a huge night for her. A real feather in her cap. Her managing partner is going to be there and everything. I listened, my expression unreadable, as I traced the name of the new wing on the blueprint with my finger. The Rose and Chloe Evans wing for children. We're all going, of course, she continued, her voice taking on a more serious, pleading tone. Your father and I, Ben. All of us. We'll have a whole table. Chloe, I'm begging you. I know these things aren't really your scene, but this is important for your sister. Please, for one night, just try to look the part. Get a nice dress. Do something with your hair. Please, don't embarrass the family. There they were. The words. The 6 words that had defined my entire existence in her eyes. The sentence that had been used as a whip to keep me in line, to make me feel small and inadequate. Don't embarrass the family. But this time, the words didn't sting, they didn't cut. This time, they sounded absurd. They were the words of a person living in a beautifully decorated room with no windows, completely unaware of the world outside. The power they once held over me was gone, evaporated by thousands of hours of hard work, by the respect of people like David Harrison and Liam Shaw, and by the sheer undeniable reality of a $5 million bank account. A small, secret smile touched my lips. The hunter was walking willingly into the trap. Don't worry, Mom, I said, my voice a mask of calm reassurance. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat, before delivering the final prophetic line. I promise, it's going to be a night no one will ever forget. Oh good, she said, relieved, completely missing the double meaning in my words. That's my girl. I knew you'd understand. I hung up the phone and looked from the glossy invitation to the blueprint, the gilded cage, and the key, the humiliation and the vindication. Everything was coming full circle. I felt a profound sense of calm, a focused, cold power that settled deep in my bones. The girl who used to be terrified of this family was gone. In her place was a woman who was about to patiently, deliberately, and publicly dismantle their entire world, and she was going to use their own party to do it. The night of the gala arrived on a wave of crisp autumn air. The event was being held at the Montgomery Grand, the most opulent hotel in the city. As I paid the taxi driver, I looked up at the glittering facade, feeling like I was stepping into a movie. I was wearing a simple, elegant dark blue dress. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned, purchased with the first real paycheck from the modest salary the Sparrow's Nest Board now insisted I take. It wasn't flashy or revealing, but it fit me perfectly. It was a dress that said quiet confidence, which was exactly how I felt. I walked into the grand ballroom, and the scene was overwhelming. A sea of tuxedos and designer gowns flowed around tables draped in white linen. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The air hummed with the sound of clinking glasses, polite laughter, and the soft music of a string quartet in the corner. This was their world, the world of money, power, and influence, the world that had always felt so impenetrable to me. I spotted my family immediately. They were holding court at a prominent table near the front of the stage. My father stood tall in his tuxedo, looking proud and important. My mother was a vision in silver, her smile dazzling as she chatted with a woman dripping in diamonds. And Jessica was the star of the show. She wore a shimmering, sequined red dress that screamed for attention. She was surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits, her partners from the firm, I presumed. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the absolute picture of success. I took a deep breath and began to walk towards them. As I approached, my mother saw me. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I saw her eyes do a quick, critical scan of my dress, my hair, my simple makeup. She seemed vaguely surprised that I didn't look like a complete disaster. "Chloe, you made it," she said, giving me a quick air kiss near my cheek. My father gave me a curt nod, his attention already drifting back to the important-looking man he was talking to. Jessica turned, and her eyes raked over me, a familiar, condescending smirk forming on her lips. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. She leaned in and whispered to one of her colleagues, but she made sure it was just loud enough for me to hear. "That's my little sister. Sweet, but a bit of a failure, bless her heart. She works some admin job for charity." The man chuckled politely, his eyes flicking over me with disinterest before dismissing me completely. The insult, once so potent, bounced off the invisible armor I now wore. I just smiled faintly and said, "The ballroom looks beautiful, Jessica." Her smile tightened. She was annoyed that I hadn't risen to the bait. Before she could say anything else, I excused myself. "I'm going to get some water." I moved away from the table, feeling their collective gaze of pity on my back. I felt like an anthropologist, observing a strange foreign tribe. I felt utterly disconnected from them, and the feeling was liberating. As I stood by the water station, I scanned the crowd. My eyes landed on a familiar face across the room. Liam Shaw, my cousin's fiancé, the neutral observer. He was standing with a group of men, but he wasn't engaged in the conversation. He was watching. His sharp, intelligent eyes were moving around the room, analyzing the power dynamics, the social currents. He saw me, and his eyes met mine. He gave me a small, curious nod, a hint of a smile on his face. Then his gaze flickered to my family's table, and he saw the way they had turned their backs on me, already absorbing Jessica back into their circle of light. I saw a flicker of understanding in his expression. He was seeing it all, the entire dysfunctional dynamic with fresh, unbiased eyes. He was putting the pieces together. I found a quiet spot near the back of the ballroom, a small table tucked away in an alcove. From here, I had a perfect view of the entire room. I could see my family preening. I could see the city's elite networking. I could see David Harrison moving through the crowd, shaking hands, a genuine happy smile on his face. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle, encouraging wink. I was a ghost at my own party, a silent observer, watching the proceedings with a sense of detached calm. The room was a whirlwind of energy, a storm of ego and ambition and performance. And I, the person who was the secret reason for it all, was the quietest person in the room. I was the calm, still center of the hurricane that was about to hit land. All I had to do was wait. After what felt like an eternity of small talk and appetizers, the main event began. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A professionally produced video began to play on the giant screens, flanking the stage, showing heartbreaking images of the old, struggling haven for hope, followed by inspiring clips of the happy, thriving children there today. It was emotional, effective, and I had helped David's team script it myself. When the video ended, the gala's host, a local news anchor, walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He spoke for a few minutes about the importance of community and giving back before introducing the representative from the gala's primary sponsor. "Please join me in welcoming a true champion of our community, a senior partner at Lockhart, Steele and Evans, Miss Jessica Evans." My sister practically floated to the stage, her red sequin dress catching the light like 1,000 tiny sparks. She beamed at the audience, a picture of corporate grace and philanthropic largesse. My parents, at their front row table, looked like they might actually burst with pride. My mother clutched my father's arm, her eyes shining with tears of joy. This was their moment. This was the validation of their entire life's philosophy, that money and status were the only things that mattered. "Thank you," Jessica began, her voice smooth and practiced. "At Lockhart, Steele and Evans, we believe that success is not just about what you achieve for yourself, but about what you give back to the community." She launched into a 5-minute speech filled with empty platitudes about corporate responsibility and the power of philanthropy. She spoke as if she had personally been tutoring the children at the shelter. She talked about her firm's deep and abiding commitment to causes like Haven for Hope. The whole time, she radiated a smug self-satisfaction that made my stomach turn. She was accepting praise for a victory she had not only had no part in, but had actively worked against by belittling the very person who had orchestrated it. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. She took her bow and returned to her table, where she was greeted with hugs and backpats. She was the hero of the hour. Next, a few other dignitaries spoke, and then finally, the host returned to the podium. "And now," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity, "it is my great honor to introduce the man who has been the heart and soul of Haven for Hope for over 20 years. Please welcome its director, Miss David Harrison." David walked onto the stage to a warm, sustained ovation. He looked humble and dignified in his simple suit. He smiled, waiting for the applause to die down. "Thank you," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate a dream that has against all odds come true." He started by thanking all the sponsors, including Jessica's firm. He gave them a polite nod. "We are grateful for the support of our corporate partners," he said, and I noticed the subtle distinction in his words. They were partners, not saviors. Then, his tone shifted. It became more personal, more intense. He began to tell the story of the shelter's journey, of the dark days when they were weeks from closing their doors forever. He spoke of the fear, the desperation, and the feeling of utter hopelessness. "And then," he said, his voice dropping, drawing the entire room in, "a miracle happened. It didn't come in the form of a government grant or a massive corporate check. It started with a whisper, a secret benefactor, an anonymous founder who approached us with a radical idea." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw my family lean forward, intrigued. This was a part of the story they didn't know. "This person didn't just want to write a check," David continued, his eyes scanning the room. "This person wanted to build a new model, a smarter, more efficient way of giving. This person believed in us when no one else would. This person took a modest personal inheritance and through sheer brilliance and relentless hard work, turned it into a multi-million-dollar force for good that has now helped not just our shelter, but multiple children's charities across the city." The murmuring grew louder. Who was this mystery benefactor? This philanthropic ghost? I saw Jessica exchange a confused look with my father. Their perfect narrative for the evening was being complicated. "Tonight," David said, his voice ringing with power, "we not only break ground on a new building, but we finally honor the architect of this new era of hope. We are dedicating our new building to this founder's family, to honor the legacy of the person who first inspired this incredible journey. Please, direct your attention to the screens for the official name of our new building." Every head in the room turned towards the giant screens. The artist's rendering of the beautiful, modern new building appeared. And then, slowly, elegantly, the words began to fade in. "The Rose and Chloe Evans Wing for Children." A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a sound I would remember for the rest of my life. I watched my family. It was like watching a film in slow motion. Their smiles were still plastered on their faces, but they were frozen, like masks of joy that had hardened and cracked. My father's jaw, which had been set in a proud line, went slack. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. My mother's hand, which had been clutching his arm, flew to her chest, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish on her pale, bloodless face. And Jessica. Oh, Jessica. The color drained from her face. I could see it happen, even from across the room. The triumphant rosy glow she'd had all night vanished, replaced by a ghastly, sickly white. She looked, from the screen, to my parents, and then her eyes began a frantic, panicked search of the crowd. She looked utterly, completely shocked. She was speechless. They all were. They froze, statues of hubris in the middle of a party. Before the confusion could turn into whispers, before they could begin to process the impossible name on the screen, David Harrison smiled a wide, brilliant smile. "It is my profound honor," he announced, his voice booming through the silent room, "to finally introduce you to the woman who made all of this possible. The founder of the Sparrow's Nest Foundation, the architect of this miracle, Ms. Chloe Evans." Whump! Every single spotlight in the massive ballroom swung away from the stage and converged on my small hidden table in the back. I was bathed in a blinding white light. The entire room, hundreds of pairs of eyes, turned as one to stare at me. The silence was deafening. It stretched for 1 second, two, and then it was broken. The silence was shattered by the sound of a single person pushing back their chair and standing up. It was Liam Shaw, from his table near the front. He turned to face me, a look of utter, unadulterated astonishment and profound admiration on his face. He began to applaud, not the polite, rhythmic clap of a gala audience, but real, enthusiastic applause. His action was a spark in a tinderbox, had cast his vote, and it was decisive. His applause was immediately joined by others. The business leaders, the city officials, the other charity directors in the room. The sound grew from a ripple to a wave, then to a roaring tide of applause that filled the entire grand ballroom. They were all standing now, their faces turned to me, their expressions a mixture of shock, respect, and awe. The applause was a physical force, a wall of sound that created a new reality in the room, and on the other side of that wall were my family. The sound isolated them, trapping them on a tiny, lonely island of their own making. I watched them as the applause washed over them. My father had sunk back into his chair, looking dazed and small. My mother was staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound was coming out. Her perfectly constructed world had been demolished in an instant. And Jessica. Her face was a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief. The spotlight that had so recently adored her now seemed to be mocking her, leaving her in the shadows while it illuminated me. Her partners at her table were staring at me, then back at her, their expressions shifting from confusion to a dawning, horrified understanding. She hadn't just been ignorant. She had been a fool. She had stood on a stage and tried to take credit for the work of the sisters she had just publicly called a failure. Ben, her husband, the eternal enabler, was just staring at me, his mouth hanging open. For the first time he wasn't looking away. He was seeing me, really seeing me, and the look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. The foundation of his comfortable life, built on his wife's perceived superiority, had just been vaporized. Feeling a strange, surreal calm, I stood up from my table. I walked through the parting sea of people, the applause continuing as I made my way to the stage. David met me at the Tess, his eyes shining with tears of pride. He shook my hand firmly. "It's your stage now, Chloe," he whispered. I walked to the podium, the bright lights warm on my face. I looked out at the hundreds of faces, and then my gaze found my family's table. They were all staring at me, their faces pale, their jaws slack. The applause slowly died down until the room was once again completely silent, waiting. I leaned into the microphone. I didn't have a speech prepared. I only had the truth. I looked directly at my family, not with anger or spite, but with a profound and unshakable peace. "My grandmother, Rose Evans," I began, my voice clear and calm, echoing through the vast silent room, "taught me that your legacy is not what you earn or what you own. It's what you build for others." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. I was told my entire life not to embarrass this family. My eyes locked with my mother's. I saw her flinch as I spoke her own words back to her. "Tonight," I finished, my voice softening but losing none of its power, "I hope I've finally made you proud." I didn't smile. I didn't shout. I simply stated the fact. I had taken their name, the one they were so obsessed with protecting, and I had made it mean something. I stepped back from the podium, gave a small nod to the audience, and walked off the stage. I didn't go back to my table. I didn't wait to see the fallout. I walked past my shattered, speechless family, their faces a tableau of wreckage, and I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom, out of the opulent hotel, and into the cool, clean night air. I had walked into that gala as Chloe Evans, the family failure. I walked out as Chloe Evans, the founder, and I was finally completely free. My story is proof that the labels other people give you, failure, loser, nobody, only have power if you let them. The world tried to put me in a box, but I decided to build my own building instead. So I have a question for you. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? Let me know your story in the comments below. I'll be reading and replying to as many as I can. And if my story resonated with you, if it gave you even a little bit of strength, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. Your support means the world. Thanks for watching.